Welcome to Office Revenge Hub. Enjoy today's story.
I thought I'd seen everything in my 6 years at Morrison and Blake. Corporate backstabbing, stolen lunches, passive-aggressive email wars. But nothing prepared me for the day my boss humiliated me in front of the entire company. And what I did next changed everything. My name is Sarah Chen, and I was a senior account manager at Morrison and Blake, a mid-sized marketing firm in downtown Seattle. When I joined the company fresh out of grad school, it was just 15 people working out of a cramped office that smelled like burnt coffee and ambition. I was employee number 16. I watched that company grow from the ground up, pulling 70-hour weeks, sleeping on the office couch during pitch season, missing family dinners, birthdays, even my sister's wedding because a client needed revisions on a Saturday night. I told myself it would be worth it. That loyalty meant something. That hard work got rewarded. Morrison and Blake specialized in brand strategy for tech startups. We were good at what we did, really good. And I was one of the reasons why. I had this ability to read clients, to understand what they needed before they even articulated it. My conversion rate was 87%. That meant nearly 9 out of 10 prospects I pitched became paying clients. The company average was 62%. I wasn't just good at my job, I was exceptional. The culture at Morrison and Blake was typical startup energy. Ping pong tables nobody had time to use, a beer fridge that got restocked every Friday, motivational posters about innovation and disruption. David Morrison, the CEO, loved to walk around the office with his sleeves rolled up, acting like he was one of us. He'd quote Steve Jobs and Simon Sinek, talk about how we were a family, how transparency and merit were our core values. I believed him. God, I actually believed him. For 6 years, I gave that place everything. I mentored junior staff on my own time. I covered for colleagues when they were overwhelmed. I brought in 3 of our 5 biggest clients, accounts that generated over 40% of our annual revenue. My performance reviews were glowing. David himself told me I was on track for a director position, maybe even a partner role eventually. I had started looking at apartments I could actually afford. I was planning a vacation, my first real one in 3 years. Then Marcus Webb got hired. Marcus was brought in as Director of Client Relations, a new position that sat somewhere above my level, but below the executive team. He came from a big agency in New York, had an MBA from Columbia, wore expensive suits that probably cost more than my monthly rent. David introduced him at an all-hands meeting, praising his vision and strategic thinking, saying Marcus was going to take us to the next level. I remember feeling excited. More leadership meant more structure, more opportunities for growth. I even volunteered to help Marcus get oriented, showed him our systems, introduced him to key clients, shared insights I'd developed over years of relationship building. Marcus was charming in that slick corporate way. Firm handshake, constant eye contact, remembered everyone's names, but there was something behind his smile that felt calculated, like he was always performing, always positioning. I ignored my gut. I figured I was being paranoid, maybe even a little territorial about someone coming in above me. The first red flag came 3 weeks after Marcus started. I had a major pitch scheduled with a potential client called Next Tech Solutions. They were a cybersecurity startup with serious funding, looking to rebrand before their Series B announcement. I'd been nurturing this relationship for 2 months, doing discovery calls, researching their market position, developing a custom strategy deck. The pitch was scheduled for a Wednesday morning. I'd practiced my presentation probably 50 times. Tuesday afternoon, Marcus called me into his office. He was sitting behind his desk, fingers steepled, that practiced smile on his face. He told me he'd be joining the Next Tech pitch. With that, he wanted to observe my process, see how I worked with clients. I thought it was a little unusual, but figured it made sense. He was new, needed to understand how we operated. I said, sure, no problem. Wednesday morning, I arrived at the client's office in Pioneer Square with my laptop. My deck loaded and ready, feeling confident. Marcus was already there, chatting with the Next Tech CEO like they were old friends. Turns out they'd connected on LinkedIn and had a call the day before. Marcus had done his homework on their company, their competitors, their market challenges. The meeting started and I launched into my presentation. About 5 slides in, Marcus interrupted, started asking the client questions, steering the conversation in a different direction. Not aggressively, but smoothly, like it was a natural collaboration. Before I knew it, Marcus was essentially running the meeting. My carefully crafted pitch got sidelined as Marcus improvised a broader strategic vision, pulling from some of my research, but framing it as his own thinking. We got the account. Next Tech signed a 6-month contract worth $120,000. Back at the office, David congratulated Marcus on landing such a significant client. Marcus thanked him, mentioned I'd done good background work. Like I was his assistant. I felt sick but told myself to let it go. We got the client, that's what mattered. Don't be petty, Sarah. But it kept happening. A pitch I'd developed for a fintech startup. Marcus requested to review it, made minor tweaks, then presented it himself while I watched from the conference room. A strategy document I'd spent weeks on. Now Marcus incorporated it into a broader company presentation without attribution. Client relationships I'd built over years. Marcus started having direct calls with them, positioning himself as their primary contact. I tried to address it professionally. I scheduled a one-on-one with Marcus. Explained that I felt like my contributions were being overlooked. He listened with that same practiced attention, nodded sympathetically, told me he absolutely valued my work, said he was just trying to elevate our output, that he saw huge potential in me, that we should collaborate more closely. He used all the right corporate language: synergy, alignment, strategic partnership. I left his office feeling heard but also manipulated, though I couldn't quite articulate why. My colleagues started treating me differently, not overtly but subtly, and I'd walk into rooms and conversations would pause. I'd suggest ideas in meetings and get polite nods instead of engagement. The junior staff who used to come to me for advice started going to Marcus instead. I felt myself becoming invisible in a company I'd helped build. Then came the Green Industries pitch. Green Industries was the biggest prospect we'd ever pursued. They were a national manufacturing company looking to modernize their brand for a younger demographic. The contract was worth over $1 million, spread across 18 months. It would be the largest account in Morrison and Blake history. David announced we'd be doing a competitive pitch against 3 other agencies. This was our chance to break into enterprise-level clients. Everyone understood the stakes. I'd actually initiated the Green relationship. 6 months earlier, I'd met their CMO, Jennifer Green, at an industry conference. We'd connected over our shared frustration with agencies that prioritized flash over substance. I'd stayed in touch, sent her relevant articles, made introductions to useful contacts in her space. When Green Industries issued their RFP, Jennifer specifically requested Morrison and Blake be invited to pitch. She'd mentioned my name in the email to David. This was my opportunity. The account that would secure my director position, maybe even get me to that partner role David had hinted at. David assembled a pitch team. Me, Marcus, our creative director Tom, and our lead strategist Rachel. We had 3 weeks to develop our proposal. I threw myself into it. Late nights, weekend work, just like the old days. I conducted market research, competitive analysis, consumer surveys. I developed a comprehensive rebranding strategy that addressed Green's specific challenges while positioning them for long-term growth. I was meticulous. This pitch was going to be perfect. We had internal reviews every few days. I'd present sections of the strategy. The team would provide feedback. Marcus would facilitate discussion. He was complimentary, called my work thorough, suggested minor refinements. I felt like maybe I'd been wrong about him. Maybe we were actually functioning as a team. The night before the pitch, we did a full run-through. David sat in to observe. I walked everyone through the complete strategy, the creative concepts Tom had developed based on my brief. The implementation timeline Rachel had mapped out. It was cohesive, compelling, and completely original. David seemed impressed. He gave notes, mostly polished stuff. Told us we had a real shot at this. As we packed up, Marcus pulled me aside. He said he'd been thinking about the presentation flow, wanted to discuss structure. We went to his office and he showed me an alternate approach to organizing the material. It made sense. Actually improved the narrative arc. I thanked him, told him that's why it was good to have experienced eyes on this stuff. He smiled that smooth smile and said we were going to crush it tomorrow. I went home feeling optimistic for the first time in months. The Green Industries pitch was scheduled for 10 a.m. at their corporate headquarters in Bellevue. David, Marcus, Tom, Rachel, and I drove over together in David's SUV. Everyone was energized, running through talking points, making last-minute refinements. We arrived at Green's office 15 minutes early, got checked in at reception, were escorted to a sleek conference room overlooking Lake Washington. Jennifer Green was there with 4 other executives, their brand director, their head of communications. They had coffee and pastries set up, were friendly and welcoming. Jennifer gave me a warm greeting, mentioned how much she'd been looking forward to our presentation. David did brief introductions, positioning Morrison & Blake as a nimble firm that combined boutique creativity with strategic rigor. Then he turned to Marcus. Said Marcus would be walking them through our proposal. I felt my stomach drop. Marcus stood, connected his laptop to their display system, and loaded up a presentation. My presentation, the same structure, the same research, the same strategy I'd developed. But every slide had been reformatted with Marcus's name in the footer. As he launched into the pitch, I realized he wasn't just presenting my work. He was presenting it as his work. The insights I'd developed, he spoke about them as his own analysis. The strategic framework I'd created, he explained it as his methodology, developed over his years in the industry. The consumer research I'd conducted, he referenced it casually as if he'd done it himself. I sat there in complete shock, unable to process what was happening. Tom and Rachel looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. David nodded along, occasionally chiming in with supportive comments. Jennifer and her team were engaged, asking questions that Marcus fielded smoothly. He'd clearly memorized every detail of my work, understood it well enough to discuss it fluently. About 20 minutes in, I tried to interject, started to add context to a point Marcus had just made. Marcus smoothly talked over me, said he'd get to that in the next section, and kept going. I tried again a few minutes later. This time, David gave me a look, not angry but pointed. A look that said, "Stop interrupting." I felt my face get hot with humiliation and anger. I spent the rest of the presentation sitting there silently, watching someone else take credit for months of my work. The pitch lasted 90 minutes. Green Industries seemed impressed. They said they'd review all the proposals and get back to us within 2 weeks. We thanked them, shook hands, packed up our materials. In the car ride back, David was elated. He kept praising Marcus, saying it was the best pitch he'd ever seen us deliver. Marcus was gracious. It said it was a team effort, but didn't specifically credit anyone. Nobody mentioned my name. It was like I hadn't been there. Back at the office, I was shaking with rage and disbelief. I waited until David was free and went to his office. I closed the door and told him what had happened. That Marcus had presented my work as his own. That every strategic insight, every piece of research, every framework in that pitch had come from me. David listened, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. He said he understood I was feeling overlooked, but that the pitch had been a collaborative effort. That Marcus had provided valuable strategic direction and had the presentation skills to deliver it effectively. That leadership meant knowing how to leverage the team's strengths. He suggested I reflect on whether I was struggling with the transition to a more structured organization, now that we were no longer a small startup where everyone wore multiple hats. I stood there, stunned. I just told him someone had stolen my work and he was suggesting the problem was my attitude. I tried to push back. Said this wasn't about ego, it was about basic professional integrity. David's tone got firmer. He said he didn't want to hear negativity or finger-pointing, that Marcus was a valuable addition to our leadership team and I needed to learn to work collaboratively. That if I couldn't adapt to our growth, maybe I needed to consider whether Morrison and Blake was still the right fit for me. The threat was clear: shut up or leave. I left his office feeling like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. This was the company I'd devoted 6 years to. The CEO who'd called me a rock star, who'd promised me a future here, and now he was telling me to fall in line or get out because I'd complained about having my work stolen. I went back to my desk and sat there numb. My hands were trembling. A couple of colleagues asked if I was okay. I said I was fine, just tired. Nobody pushed. Nobody wanted to get involved. I understood. Everyone had mortgages, bills, responsibilities. Standing up for me meant risking their own positions. That afternoon, Marcus sent a company-wide email praising the pitch team, specifically thanking Tom and Rachel by name for their contributions. My name wasn't mentioned. I stared at that email for probably 10 minutes, reading it over and over, unable to comprehend how this was my reality. For the next week, I moved through the office like a ghost. I did my work mechanically, spoke when spoken to, avoided extended conversations. I felt hollowed out. I kept replaying the green pitch in my head, wondering if I should have interrupted more forcefully, made David acknowledge my contributions, but I knew it wouldn't have mattered. Marcus had David's ear. I was just an account manager who'd gotten too big for her position. 10 days after the pitch, David called an all-hands meeting. He had big news. Green Industries had chosen Morrison and Blake. We'd won the largest contract in company history. The office erupted in cheers. David gave a speech about how this represented a new chapter for the firm, how we were playing with the big agencies now. He thanked Marcus personally, said his strategic vision and presentation skills had secured the win. Marcus stood and accepted the applause, humble and grateful. He thanked the team, mentioned Tom and Rachel again, still didn't say my name. Jennifer Green had sent feedback along with the contract. David read it aloud. She'd praised the depth of strategic thinking, the innovative approach to brand positioning, the clear understanding of their market challenges. Everything she described was work I'd done. I sat there listening to my own accomplishments being attributed to someone else. After the meeting, David announced that Marcus was being promoted to Vice President of Strategy and Client Relations. He'd be getting a significant raise in equity in the company. That evening, David took Marcus, Tom, and Rachel out for a celebration dinner at an expensive steakhouse downtown. I wasn't invited. Nobody even pretended I should be. I went home that night and cried for the first time since I was a kid. Not sad crying, but angry crying. the kind where your whole body shakes and you can't catch your breath. 6 years of loyalty, of sacrifice, of exceptional work. And this was how it ended. Watching someone else get promoted on the back of my labor while I got erased. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed staring at my ceiling, my mind spinning through everything that had happened. I kept coming back to the same realization. David knew. He absolutely knew Marcus had stolen my work. He just didn't care. Because Marcus had the pedigree, the Columbia MBA, the big agency experience. Marcus looked and sounded like what David thought leadership should be. I was useful for doing the work, but Marcus was valuable for taking credit for it. That's how they saw me. Now, as a workhorse, not a racehorse. Around 3 a.m, something shifted in me. I stopped crying. I stopped feeling sorry for myself. A cold, clear anger settled in my chest. They'd taken my work, they'd humiliated me, they'd made me feel worthless, but they'd also made a critical mistake. They'd underestimated me. I got up, made coffee, opened my laptop. I started making a list, every client relationship I'd built, every piece of proprietary knowledge I had about our processes, our pricing, our strategies, every skill I'd developed. Every contact I'd made in 6 years of industry conferences, networking events, and late-night emails. I looked at that list and realized something. Morrison and Blake hadn't made me valuable. I'd made Morrison and Blake valuable. They'd just convinced me otherwise. By sunrise, I'd made a decision, which I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to complain. I wasn't going to try to convince David or Marcus or anyone else to treat me fairly. I was done expecting loyalty from people who'd proven they had none, but I also wasn't going to just quit and walk away quietly. That would be letting them off easy. They'd stolen 6 years of my life and my biggest professional achievement. That had a cost, and I was going to make sure they paid it. I went into work that morning calm, eerily calm. People noticed. A few colleagues asked if I was feeling better. I smiled and said I was fine, had gotten some perspective. I congratulated Marcus on his promotion, told him he deserved it. The confusion in his eyes was satisfying. He'd expected me to be bitter, resentful. Instead, I was professional, even friendly. That made him nervous. Good. I spent the next 2 weeks being the model employee, showed up on time, did my work efficiently, volunteered for projects, was helpful and collaborative. I attended Marcus's first strategy meeting as VP and took detailed notes, asked thoughtful questions, provided useful input. I could see David relax. He'd been worried I'd be a problem, that I'd poison the culture with resentment. Instead, I seemed to have accepted the new reality. He probably thought he'd successfully managed me into submission, but while I was being the perfect team player at the office, I was doing something else entirely in my off hours. I started reaching out to my network, not aggressively, just casually. Coffee chats, phone calls, LinkedIn messages. I reconnected with former colleagues who'd moved to other agencies. I set up informational interviews with creative directors and strategists at competitor firms. I asked questions about their cultures, their client portfolios, their growth trajectories. I framed it as professional development, just trying to understand the broader industry landscape. People were happy to talk. They liked me, remembered me as someone who was generous with her time and expertise. I also started documenting everything, every email that showed my work on the green pitch, every draft, with my name in the metadata, every piece of research I'd conducted, every client communication where I'd initiated and built relationships. I organized it all into a detailed portfolio that clearly demonstrated my contributions. Not because I planned to sue. I didn't have money for lawyers, and non-competes would complicate things. I documented it because I needed to be able to prove my value when the time came. Then I started reaching out to clients, not Morrison and Blake clients. That would be unethical and probably illegal, but prospects I'd connected with over the years who hadn't signed with us. Former clients from my first job who'd always said to stay in touch. People I'd met at conferences, industry events, through mutual connections. I sent friendly emails, asked how their businesses were doing, offered to grab coffee and catch up. No sales pitch, no agenda, just genuine relationship building. Most importantly, I started teaching myself everything I didn't know. Marcus had something I didn't: business operations experience. He knew how to structure deals, manage P&L statements, negotiate contracts. I'd always been on the creative and strategy side. So I took online courses in business finance, contract law, and agency operations. I read books on entrepreneurship and small business management. I studied case studies of successful agency founders. I worked on this every evening, every weekend. While Marcus was celebrating his promotion and David was counting the green industry's revenue, I was building the foundation for my next move. About a month after the green pitch, I got a message on LinkedIn from someone named Robert Chen. No relation, though the shared last name caught my eye. Robert was a serial entrepreneur who'd founded and sold 2 tech companies. He was looking to start a boutique marketing agency focused on serving mid-market tech companies that were tired of being small fish at big agencies. He'd seen my profile, noticed I'd been at Morrison and Blake for 6 years, was impressed by my client results. He asked if I'd be interested in chatting about the market opportunity he was seeing. We met for coffee on a Saturday morning. Robert was maybe 40, soft-spoken, intensely smart. He'd made enough money from his exits that he didn't need this venture to succeed financially. He just wanted to build something excellent. He'd been researching the marketing agency space for months, identified a gap between solo freelancers and large established firms. He wanted to create something nimble and personalized, but with enough structure and expertise to handle complex brand strategy. He had the capital and business acumen. He needed someone with deep client expertise and proven results. I told him about my background, my track record, my approach to client relationships. I didn't trash talk Morrison and Blake or mention what had happened with Marcus. I just presented my work objectively, showed him case studies, explained my methodology. Robert asked smart questions about pricing models, client retention, team structure. We talked for 3 hours. At the end, he asked if I'd ever considered starting my own agency. I said honestly, not seriously, but I was open to new opportunities. He suggested we keep talking. Over the next month, Robert and I met 5 more times. We developed a business plan for what would become Catalyst Brand Partners. The model was straightforward. High-touch, strategic brand work for tech companies in the $5 to $50 million revenue range. Companies too sophisticated for generic marketing, but too small to be priorities at major agencies. We'd stay lean, keep overhead low, and price competitively but not cheap. Most importantly, we'd be transparent about who did what work. No bait and switch where senior people pitch and junior people execute. Robert would handle business operations and finance. I'd lead strategy and client services. Eventually, we'd hire, but carefully. The numbers worked. Robert was willing to invest $200,000 to get us started. Office space, technology, initial hires, 6 months of runway. In exchange, he'd take 45% equity. I'd have 45%, and we'd reserve 10% for future key hires. I'd need to bring clients, prove the concept. If we hit specific revenue targets in the first year, we'd both take salaries. If not, I'd be working essentially for free while burning through savings. It was terrifying, and it was exactly what I needed to do. I told Robert I was in. We shook hands in a Starbucks on a rainy Tuesday evening. We agreed to officially launch in 3 months. That gave me time to prepare, to line up initial clients, and to leave Morrison and Blake properly. That last part was important. I wasn't going to burn bridges or violate any agreements. I'd signed a non-compete that prevented me from soliciting Morrison and Blake clients for 1 year after leaving. I'd signed an NDA that prevented me from sharing proprietary information. I planned to honor both. I didn't need to break rules, I just needed to be smart. I gave my notice on a Wednesday morning right after the weekly strategy meeting. I walked into David's office and told him I was resigning. 2 weeks' notice, professional and clean. He was surprised. Asked why I was leaving. I kept it vague. I said I'd been offered an opportunity that was a better fit for my career goals. He asked where I was going. I told him I wasn't ready to share that yet. He got slightly defensive. Asked if this was about the Marcus situation. Said he hoped I wasn't leaving with hard feelings. I smiled and told him not at all. I'd learned a lot at Morrison and Blake, was grateful for the experience. That seemed to satisfy him. Marcus was less gracious. He pulled me aside after he heard the news, asked point blank if I was starting a competing agency. I told him honestly that I couldn't discuss my plans due to his non-compete agreements. He suggested darkly that they'd enforce those agreements aggressively if they had any reason to. I assured him I understood and respected our contracts. He didn't look convinced, but there wasn't much he could do. One, I hadn't broken any rules. My last 2 weeks at Morrison and Blake were surreal. There was a small goodbye lunch, some half-hearted speeches about my contributions. A few colleagues seemed genuinely sad to see me go. Most were just awkward, unsure how to engage with someone who was leaving. Marcus avoided me. David was professionally cordial but distant. On my last day, I packed up my desk, said goodbye to people I'd worked alongside for 6 years, and walked out of the building. I felt nothing. No nostalgia, no regret, just cold focus on what came next. Catalyst Brand Partners launched quietly 2 months later. Robert secured office space in a converted warehouse in the Fremont neighborhood, exposed brick and natural light, nothing fancy but professional. We hired an office manager and a junior designer. I brought over a freelance strategist I'd worked with before. We built a simple website, established our brand identity, set up all the operational infrastructure. Then came the hard part, getting clients. I started with the relationships I'd been cultivating, the former clients from my previous job, the prospects I'd stayed in touch with over the years. I sent personalized messages explaining I'd left Morrison and Blake to start a boutique firm focused on giving mid-market companies the strategic attention they deserved, not disparaging my old firm, just clearly articulating what made Catalyst different. The response was better than I'd hoped. My first client was a SaaS company called Dataflow that I'd met at a conference 2 years earlier. Their VP of marketing remembered me, had been frustrated with their current agency, agreed to a trial project worth $30,000. We delivered exceptional work, exactly what I'd promised. They signed an annual retainer worth $180,000. Second client was a hardware startup called Apex Robotics. I'd done free consulting for their founder as a favor a year ago, just answered questions over coffee because I liked helping people. He was now ready to hire an agency and called me first. Another retainer, this one worth $200,000 annually. Third client was a fintech company whose CMO had worked with me at Morrison and Blake on a different account 3 years ago before I'd even joined the firm. She'd moved to a new company, remembered me as someone who delivered real value. We won their business over 2 larger agencies, $300,000 retainer. Within 4 months, Catalyst had 7 clients and over $1 million in contracted revenue. We were profitable. Robert and I started taking salaries. We hired 3 more people. I was working harder than I ever had at Morrison and Blake, but it felt different. I was building something, not just serving someone else's vision. The industry noticed. Marketing publications wrote about Catalyst as an example of the boutique agency trend. I got invited to speak at conferences. Other mid-level agency people started reaching out, asking how I'd made the leap. I was honest with them. It was terrifying. A high required savings or investment meant working 100-hour weeks, but it was also incredibly rewarding to build something aligned with my values. Then about 8 months after I'd left Morrison & Blake, I got a call from Jennifer Green. She was professional but direct. Said Green Industries was unhappy with Morrison & Blake's work. The strategy that had been pitched, the one that won them the contract, wasn't being executed. The team assigned to their account didn't seem to understand the nuances of the approach. The work felt generic, not customized. She tried to address it with Marcus, but he was dismissive, told her they were following the agreed strategy. She disagreed. She felt like they'd been sold one thing and delivered another. Then she asked me something I hadn't expected. She said she'd done some research after our original pitch, looked into who at Morrison & Blake had actually worked on which accounts, talked to some contacts in the industry. She'd realized I was the strategist behind most of Morrison & Blake's best work. Then she'd noticed I'd left to start Catalyst. She asked directly, had I developed the green strategy? I was careful with my answer. I told her I'd contributed to that pitch as part of a team effort, but that Morrison & Blake owned that work and I couldn't discuss proprietary client information. She understood. Then she asked if Catalyst would be interested in pitching for Green's business. Their contract with Morrison & Blake had a termination clause, allowing them to end the relationship with 60 days' notice if deliverables weren't met. They were prepared to use it. I told her I'd need to check on potential conflicts of interest and timing, but yes, we'd be very interested. After I hung up, I sat in my office for a long time, staring at my wall. This was it, the moment I'd been working towards without even consciously realizing it. Morrison & Blake's biggest client, the account that had secured Marcus's promotion and validated David's belief in his new leadership structure, was about to walk away, and they were walking straight to me. I called Robert, explained the situation. He immediately saw the opportunity, but also the risk. If we took Green Industries, Morrison & Blake would know exactly who was responsible for losing them. They might try to claim I'd violated my non-compete, even though I hadn't solicited Green. They'd come to me. We'd need to be airtight on documentation. Robert said it was worth it. Green was the kind of anchor client that could define Catalyst's reputation. I put together a pitch team. We spent 3 weeks developing a comprehensive strategy for Green that built on their current needs, but also looked 5 years ahead. And I included the junior strategist in the process, made sure she understood every element so she could co-present. When we pitched to Jennifer and her team, I was transparent about my role in the original Morrison & Blake pitch. I explained I'd developed that strategy, but that I'd grown since then, had learned from building my own firm, had new perspectives to offer. I showed them exactly who would work on their account and how we operated. No bait and switch, no surprises. Green Industries signed with Catalyst. $1.2 million contract, 18 months with options to extend. It was the largest deal we'd ever closed. It tripled our revenue overnight. We had to hire 6 more people immediately to handle the work. Robert and I sat in our conference room after signing the contract, somewhat stunned at how fast everything had changed. Word got back to Morrison & Blake within days. David called me. Not friendly, not professional, actually angry. He accused me of stealing clients, of violating my non-compete, of being unethical. I let him vent. When he paused for breath, I calmly explained that Green Industries had initiated contact with me, that I had documentation proving That I'd been careful not to solicit any Morrison and Blake clients. I reminded him that my non-compete prevented solicitation, not accepting business from clients who chose to leave and reached out independently. I suggested if he had legal concerns, he should have his attorney contact mine. He hung up on me. 2 weeks later, I received a cease and desist letter from Morrison and Blake's lawyers. They claimed I'd violated my non-compete and NDA, that I'd stolen proprietary information and client relationships. It was aggressive and accusatory. My lawyer reviewed it and laughed. She said they had no case. I'd documented everything, had timestamps on all my communications with Green showing they'd initiated contact, had never shared any Morrison and Blake proprietary information. She drafted a response that was professionally devastating, laying out exactly how Morrison and Blake's claims were baseless and suggesting that further legal action would be ill-advised. We never heard from their lawyers again. But the damage to Morrison and Blake was just beginning. Losing Green Industries was embarrassing, but they could have survived it. The problem was what happened next. 3 other clients. Now, accounts I'd originally brought in during my time there also left Morrison and Blake over the following 6 months. Not because I'd solicited them, I hadn't, but because the account team serving them, the team Marcus had assembled, wasn't delivering the same quality work. Those clients asked around the industry about alternatives. My name kept coming up. They reached out. I accepted their business. Morrison and Blake's revenue dropped by 40% in less than a year. They had to lay off staff. Marcus, the Golden Boy VP, resigned under pressure. I heard through industry contacts that David had furiously blamed him for losing Green, for not maintaining client relationships, for not understanding the strategic work well enough to execute on it. Marcus landed at another agency, but never regained his upward trajectory. So his big agency pedigree meant less when he couldn't point to retained clients or proven results. David tried to stabilize Morrison and Blake by bringing in new leadership and pivoting to smaller clients, but the reputation damage was done. They'd been exposed as a firm that overpromised and underdelivered. Within 2 years, they'd shrunk back to roughly the size they were when I'd joined. That big leap they'd made with the Green contract? Completely erased. Meanwhile, Catalyst kept growing. We hit $5 million in revenue our second year, $10 million our third year. We maintained our culture of transparency and merit. When people did great work, they got credit for it. When they grew, they got promoted. We had almost zero turnover because people actually wanted to work there. I ran into David at an industry conference about 3 years after I'd left Morrison and Blake. He looked older, tired. We made awkward eye contact across a hotel ballroom. He didn't approach me. I didn't approach him. There was nothing to say. He'd made his choice when he decided Marcus's pedigree was more valuable than my work. He'd chosen the impressive resume over the proven performer. That decision had cost him his company's growth trajectory and his reputation in the industry. I occasionally think about whether I should feel guilty, whether taking clients from Morrison and Blake was really revenge or just business. Here's what I've concluded. I didn't take anything from them. They gave away what they had by failing to value it. Those clients didn't leave because I stole them. They left because Morrison and Blake couldn't deliver what they'd promised. Marcus couldn't execute the strategies I'd developed because he'd never actually understood them. He'd just memorized them well enough to present. David couldn't retain talented people because he'd created a culture where loyalty and merit didn't matter, only appearance and politics. I didn't destroy Morrison and Blake. They destroyed themselves by building their growth on a foundation of stolen work and false credit. I just stopped being the person whose labor held that foundation together. The real revenge wasn't taking their clients or watching Marcus fail or seeing David's company shrink. The real revenge was succeeding on my own terms, building something better, creating a firm where people's work was valued and attributed correctly, making enough money to be comfortable but not compromising my principles to get there, proving that you don't need an MBA from Columbia or a corner office or a CEO's protection to do exceptional work and build a valuable company. You just need skill, integrity, and the courage to walk away from people who don't value you. I still work hard, probably too hard, but now it's for something I built, something that reflects my values. I make decisions about who we work with, how we treat people, what kind of culture we create. When someone on my team does great work, I make sure everyone knows it. When someone grows and develops, I promote them. When someone comes to me with a problem, I listen and actually address it. And that's the lesson I learned from the worst professional experience of my life. Your worth isn't determined by whether other people recognize it. It's determined by what you do with your skills and your principles when you're tested. Marcus and David tested me by taking credit for my work and humiliating me for objecting. I could have accepted it, could have stayed small and resentful. Instead, I walked away and built something that proved exactly what I was capable of. They didn't humiliate me. They freed me. They showed me that loyalty to people who don't deserve it is just self-betrayal. They taught me that the best revenge isn't confrontation or exposing people or public vindication. The best revenge is outgrowing the people who underestimated you. It's succeeding so thoroughly that their opinions become irrelevant. It's building something so aligned with your values that their betrayal becomes the catalyst for your best work. Morrison and Blake gave me 6 years of experience and a painful lesson in what I wouldn't accept from people. Catalyst gave me ownership, autonomy, and proof that I didn't need anyone's validation to succeed. I'll take that trade every time. Sometimes late at night when I'm reviewing financials or preparing for a big pitch, I think about that day in the Green Industries conference room, watching Marcus present my work as his own, the rage and helplessness I felt, how small they made me feel. Then I look around my office, at my team, at the business I've built, and I realize something. They couldn't make me small. They could only reveal how small they were. In people who need to steal others' work to appear valuable are fundamentally insecure about their own worth. People who allow that theft because they're impressed by credentials over character are fundamentally poor judges of talent. I'm not angry anymore. I'm grateful. They gave me the clarity to leave and the motivation to build something better. That's more valuable than any promotion they could have offered. If you've ever been betrayed at work, you're not alone. Where are you watching from right now? Drop it in the comments. Subscribe to Office Revenge Hub for more powerful workplace revenge stories.